I'd love to talk about Foundation. I know we kind of brought it up a bit already, and I'm curious for you, how did you first get involved on that show?
Well, I mean, technically, it was by DNEG calling me, going, "Do you want to do Foundation?" It's like, yeah. But so it really started when I flew out on set to Limerick in Ireland, where we filmed most of the stage work, and I met with Chris McLean, our production supervisor, and we just sat down in his office, and it was looking great. His office walls were plastered with printouts, not of other movies, but of NASA photography. So it was all real space photography, left, right, up, down, and he had all these 3D prints of spaceships and other models and miniatures that he wanted to make. And so we just started talking about the approach we wanted to take for Foundation, and a lot of it was, of course, based on practical locations. We talked about LED screens, doing as much for real as possible, miniatures I just mentioned. We also sat down and just kind of watched movies, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Alien, Interstellar, and sort of just tried to pinpoint the things that worked for us. And then we also watched a couple of movies that we thought didn't work that well in terms of the visual execution. And one of the things I remember we discussed was the use of green screen and how we wanted to minimize it. I don't want to be too condescending towards green screen, because it is a very important tool. I feel like people in the industry in general hate it for no reason, because it's such a great tool. But a successful green screen requires that you set it up correctly on set, and then you spend time in post pulling a decent...
No green blanket is what you're trying to say?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, green painted cardboard. And so we kind of said, we're on a TV budget and a TV schedule, so let's just try and avoid green screen where possible. And then we started talking about virtual production and LED screens, and we try and translights, and we try to use those wherever possible. And on set it was just brilliant, because you had the actual lighting from... Even though the background often was going to be replaced, you had actual lighting, the actors had something to react to. And all of those discussions I had on my first day really set the bar very, very high for photorealism and just the fantastic approach that I completely agree with when it comes to visual effects.
No, that's great. And you also talked about green screen, but also I'm curious, what are your thoughts on where things are going, let's say, with virtual production? Obviously, there's some limitations in terms of it's not as easy to allocate a set and have creative freedom shooting everything. But in general, is that something that you've been fascinated by or wanting to lean into?
Yeah, I mean, I actually worked with VR back in 2007, 2008. I did an internship at Airbus in Germany, and they had this huge thing they called the Cave, which is this 5-wall projection, and they used to take customers in there with 3D glasses to sort of see their future planes and be able to customize them in real time. And that was way before consumer VR was a thing. So I've definitely been interested in the matter for a long time. Every production is now trying to use virtual production, often without thinking. I think it's 100% the future. The cost will come down. Training will get better. Crews, at the moment, you still need, a fairly large amount of crew for the job. That's all going to come down. Tools are going to get more intuitive. I think they're already a lot better than what we used 2.5 years ago on Foundation. And our setup was very basic. But I've seen the Unreal stuff, and obviously stagecraft is a huge deal. So I think 5 years from now, it's going to be at a point where both vendors and hardware suppliers and crew on set are going to be ready to just kind of plug it in. What's really exciting to me is that it forces everyone to think about and to make decisions ahead of time. So visual effects will come in much earlier in pre-production, because the old fix it in post attitude isn't really going to work.
Fix it in pre.
Yeah. That's just it. But that's a really good thing. And I think filmmakers and actors are definitely, and DPs are excited about that, because they get what they see. And of course, I love being involved early on and being a part of the filmmaking process and developing that world with the director and everyone right there. Which too often we're just an afterthought, you know.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I kind of, for me, when it started to become a lot more mainstream and trending, I got very intrigued by it all more from where it borrows from the budget, because post is always, you know, the aftermath and just the fact that you are technically kind of working with production design, you're involved extremely early on in every phase. It's kind of like, you know, well, what is it? Is it production? Is it pre-production? Is it post and you're burning your budget before you even get into post? Like, what's going on? But in a lot of ways, it seems like it kind of ends up allocating its own budget for it. But that's always kind of intrigued me, as kind of a chance to reinvent the process a little bit and kind of fight back, opposed to being stuck in the, well, this is all we have left over, have fun, trying to make something good with very little money.
Yeah, no, it's just great to be treated like a normal department, rather than, oh, these guys in green are going to show up again and later they're going to, you know, destroy our movie. That was sort of, I think that attitude has been fading away anyway, luckily. But there was definitely until a few years ago, you know, visual effects was always sort of the ugly duckling on set. No one really, you know, the AD never wants to shoot clean plates, of course, you know. It's always,
your job comes during the lunch break, not when the adults are doing their job.
Yeah. And now we're there from the start, just like the other departments, and we're having a huge hand in the look and feel of the world that we're creating. It's very exciting for sure.
And that's another good point that you brought up with TV as well. Like, do you feel like we're finally at a point now where TV is getting the budgets that it needs compared to, let's just say, like early 2000s? If you're working in TV, it's extremely tight, whereas now it's not unheard of to get $1 million for an episode. And in a lot of ways, like it's a chance to do things right and at feature film quality or close to.
Yeah, no, I definitely think so. I mean, aren't they just spending $1 billion on that Lord of the Rings series that they're making?
Crazy.
Yeah, exactly. There's still on Foundation, there's a bit of a misconception. I've read so many times that we had all this Apple money, but we had a pretty limited budget, actually. And we had to be extremely efficient within that budget. I do think so. Obviously, TV, especially now with everyone still being stuck at home for the most part, you know, TV and streaming is here to stay, and in fact it's replacing theaters as we speak. So I think that's where the budget's going to go. And long form storytelling is extremely successful for studios, and it's arguably much more interesting for consumers as well.
Yeah.
So I do think that that's where all the budget is going and is going to go in the future. And the other thing is, when it comes to VFX vendors, I think we've all learned to repurpose our pipelines for TV, you know, because so many vendors used to do only features, and now using the same pipeline. And I think that the first years were probably a little bit clunky, but I think everyone's kind of learned to work on TV schedules as well as sort of the quality level. Although honestly, the quality level, Foundation was 4K and HDR, which is higher than, in terms of resolution and dynamic range, than most movies we still deliver, right?
I was going to bring that up, actually. The transition from 2K just with upscaling versus actually going true 4K is like, that was an argument earlier on, but now it's just standard.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is crazy. But at the same time, you know, technology advances as well. I think, again, we just talked about virtual production, real-time technology. Obviously, the Unity deal just happened at the time of this recording, and we have Unreal. So those provide fantastic ways of getting shots out quickly, and even finals out quickly, you know.
Yes.
I think that's where the future is. Absolutely.
One or two more quick questions, but I guess one of the key ones I was curious about with Foundation is, like, were there any particular sequences in any of the episodes that stood out as being exceptionally challenging, ones that are more memorable?
Yeah.
I know that's a loaded question.
I mean, DNEG was brought on as the lead vendor, And as such, we were responsible for concept and previs and virtual production and post-viz. So we basically had a hand in everything. And the most challenging thing about Foundation by far was that we had to create not just one world, but a whole galaxy, 10,000+ years in the future, with all this new technology. So everything had to be reinvented from scratch. And we deliberately didn't look at some other sci-fi fantasy franchises, because that had been done, and we kind of wanted to give it a fresh look, right? So for instance, a lot of our holograms are sandograms, as we call them, right? So that actual particle, that matter that manifests in the air and is then lit by the room, rather than being a self-illuminated thing. And that's just one of many, many examples. DNEG did Trantor, the city planet where the Empire resides. So it's 50 levels underground of just city, a 40,000 kilometer long space elevator, culminating in this huge space station. Just the scale and the scope of it. We had to do so much work behind the scenes that no one will ever see, but I have concept art here of just cross sections of the city and sort of lighting studies, mood boards, just trying to figure out every component from the architecture to little things like the bridges connecting buildings, the traffic system, the Hyperloop train, the Imperial Palace and how that's all integrated in the city. I could give you 10 more examples of this, but it's just the scope and the scale of this universe and the immense pressure that we all felt, because it's such a seminal work of science fiction. And I myself, I'm such a huge science fiction fan. So it was pretty daunting. But in a way, there was a silver lining to the pandemic in that it did delay the whole project, right? So we basically had almost a year longer than expected, and we used that year to really develop a visual language of what the universe of Foundation was going to look like. Yeah.
I love that, and it definitely shows. I mean, you're right. Like when you actually are creating either a world or a universe, really creating that vocabulary and not phoning it in, but actually giving thought beyond the things that you're necessarily going to see, but more the thought that goes behind it. It shows without needing to see it.
Yeah. Yeah.